Welcome to the Movies to Watch Before You Die podcast. I'm your host, Dylan, along with my cousin and co-host,
Gab.
And my non-cousin and almost co-host by this point.
I'm Scott Interrante of the Film Reelists podcast. Hello.
That's him. That's our guest for I feel like we made a joke last time about the Saturday Night Live, 5-time hosting thing. And Kyle's getting awfully close. We're going to have to freeze Kyle in carbonite soon so that he needs to take a break because people need more just Gab and Dylan.
I blame Keen. This is Keen's fault.
Is it? Because
damn that Keen machine.
Okay. All right. We have watched a movie and we are here to talk about it.
Yes, somebody stopped me from talking about it because Kyle, you suggested the 1994 movie, The Mask. Kyle, we're going to dive straight into it. Why don't you tell me what is The Mask about?
What's this all been about? What am I working toward?
You think you know everything about me, don't you?
I dive at your bottom. I bloody well ought to.
The Mask is about a banker named Stanley Ipkiss, who is everybody's favorite nice guy that always finishes last, and he unknowingly finds a mystical mask that unlocks all of his inhibitions, and he becomes a wild, I'd say, antagonist for everyone else around him. And zany things ensues. He gets the girl. A lot of cartoon shenanigans also happen, and he gets involved in a little bit of Edge City gang war because as you do.
Yeah, Edge City, I feel like a name that they did not realize what the term edge would end up becoming. So that seems a little awkward now, but that's fine. At least there's no goons gooning in Edge City right now. So what did IMDb say the plot summary is? Kyle, you were pretty close. Bank clerk Stanley Ipkiss is transformed into a manic superhero when he wears a mysterious mask. I don't know if he's a superhero. He's just super shenanigans.
Yeah.
Gab, are you anxious to hear some taglines?
Always, Dylan, on the edge of my seat.
I'm going to be honest. This is a weak batch. The first one is just, and I'm going to enunciate it as it's written. Smokin. That's the first one. It has just S's and dashes like a snake. From Zero to Hero, which isn't that also a Hercules tagline?
It is.
Yes, it is. I mean, it's a song more than it's a tagline.
I don't appreciate if your tagline can work just super easily on another movie, doesn't work for me.
To be fair, though, this came before. Right, this is 94. Hercules was 97, 96.
But I do think that the phrase Zero to Hero is not coined by either.
Yeah, that's definitely not.
Yeah.
The last one, which is more just for this movie, Stanley Ipkiss is not the man he used to be. Which, that's fine.
I don't hate that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm cool with it. I like that as I'm being on a poster with him with his big green head.
Yeah.
The big green head one is Zero to Hero. I'm looking at it here.
Yeah, well, I don't know what the Stanley Ipkiss one is, but I'm saying I wouldn't mind it if it were on the big green head poster.
That's true.
Yeah. All right. We've gotten through our taglines. You want to dive into the opinion time?
Yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot of context to give for this, so let's go right in.
In opinion time, I'll give some brief context.
In this critic's opinion,
that's just like your opinion, man.
Well, I have a right to my opinion, and my opinion is you have no right to your opinion.
Stanley Ipkiss works at a bank. He's very, woe is me. Stanley Ipkiss is very, and I said it about his coworker in the movie, Charlie. Charlie could very easily have been played by Jason Alexander from Seinfeld to me, and it would have worked just as well. That his character in Shallow Hal would fit very easily in this movie as just his friend who's acting like he's cool, and it's dude, you're not that cool either. But Stanley's very sad and I wish somebody would like me. That's exactly how he sounds. That's perfect Jim Carrey, spot on. Thank you guys.
That's a little bit like my Jennifer Coolidge impersonation from last time.
Makes Stanley want a hot dog real bad. There you go. Tina, played by Cameron Diaz, comes into the bank, and it turns out she's working with Dorian, who is the mob underboss, who wants to become the mob boss. And those are our main players. Is that enough?
Yeah.
Is there super more context needed?
No,
Not really.
I mean, he puts on the mask, he becomes a cartoon character.
Yeah, he just finds he just finds the mask 10 minutes into this movie. The first 10 minutes of this movie could also just be a remake of It's a Wonderful Life, where he's like, I think I'd like to throw myself off a bridge. And then he's like, wait a second, there's something in the water. And he jumps.
That has to be on purpose, though. Also, I mean, I hadn't watched this in a while. I feel like Jim Carrey just has lots of scenes on bridges because I had forgotten the context for how I knew there was the trash in the river. I mean, it's Edge City, so it's probably disgusting. But my brain went, no, this is Bruce Almighty, because in Bruce Almighty, his life is
Mm,
also in shambles on a bridge. I'm like, but I
yeah.
don't think he gets hit by a car. And I kept conflating the two films.
That's, you know what? At the end of this, I should ask which is better, Bruce Almighty versus this. You don't have to
Yeah.
say it right now.
Don't say it yet.
I also did just think to myself, like, if I'm going to throw an opinion out there, it's pretty wild that The Mask had a movie before Wonder Woman, before Green Lantern, Iron Man, Thor, Spider-Man. The Mask.
Wait, The Mask is like a
The
this
Mask is
is
a
based
comic
on
book.
something?
Yeah, it's a Dark Horse comic series, the same guys who, Spawn, Hellboy, that type of brand. But the fact that that got a movie before you think of all those major superheroes out there, kind of crazy.
That's crazy because I was going to ask if they wrote this movie for Jim Carrey.
It's drastically different from the comics. That's one of the things that I'm sure Dylan has in trivia, though. But it wasn't until years later that I sort of discovered the actual comics. New Line was kind of famous for this, which was like either creating something, like they were known for their slasher films. What could they be made cheaply? And this was one of their, like, after Mortal Kombat, this was kind of their foray into like more franchise material. And The Mask was something that I think they did pitch it to Jim, but it's drastically different. Like the Mask character he's not a hero at all. Like a lot of violent, horrible things happen in the comics.
Yes. And the director and screenwriter they wanted Jim Carrey the whole time. So when they met with him, they were like, we don't know what we're going to do if you say no to this, basically. Yeah. New Line also, the New Line Studios that made this was really a big horror franchise for a long time. They were known as the house that Freddy built because Nightmare on Elm Street is what put them on the map. I could see how this is a very dark character in the comic books, but I can also see why they do a very smart move by just making it The Mask brings out your inner self a lot more.
Yeah.
As you see, Dylan, we all wear masks, metaphorically speaking.
Is that your Ben Stein? Your Jennifer Coolidge sounded more like Ben Stein than your Ben Stein did.
Honestly.
It's been a long day. I have a cold.
Sure. Okay, I definitely want to go last. So somebody start spewing opinions.
Okay. Cameron Diaz, the very first scene when she comes in, one of the things I had seen was that they, when they were trying to write it, they were inspired by Jessica Rabbit. And after hearing that, I've never noticed it more because the first outfit she's wearing is she's dressed like Jessica Rabbit, just the dress with like the one leg out. This is her very first role. And you can kind of tell like she's not doing a great job acting in this, but she's doing exactly what the movie needs her to do.
Yeah.
I still think this is one of her best movies, though. Like, if we're being totally honest on
one of her best
filmography.
Performances, or just one of her best movies that she's in.
Honestly, kind of both. I think that this movie in general is very 90s, but obviously the like vavoom and the not itemization, but the objectification of women is abundantly clear.
Itemization.
The itemization. It's a thing. She's an object. And so that stuff, like it's simply and it's a little gross, but in terms of what she's actually expected to do in the film, I think she achieves that. Like she's not given a lot in terms of a character arc or whatnot, but when she needs to feel excited, she feels excited. Like her job is because Jim is insane throughout the entire film. Like everyone is pretty much the straight man. Like thinking about Charlie, he always reminded me of Troy McClure from The Simpsons.
Yeah.
Although with not nearly as an interesting voice. So I think she's fine, but she's one of those people that I feel like there are more actors like this now where you're like, yeah, they have a career, but I don't love anything they've been in and I don't hate it. Like they just sort of exist.
Yeah.
Right? Like Charlie's Angels, people will look back with nostalgia goggles, but those movies are not good. Like you remember,
I know what Dylan's going to say.
The
the first Charlie's Angels is a wild ride and is fabulous in its ridiculousness.
Yeah, but what's your favorite part? Because I don't like knowing
Sam Rockwell.
Thank
Sam
you.
Rockwell's so goddamn cool in that movie.
I knew you were going to say that. So like, he's spoilers, antagonist of that 24-year-old movie. So I think she does everything she's supposed to do. But the saddest part to me when watching this, and I had to look this up out of morbid curiosity, given all of our ages, is I remember seeing this as a kid. Obviously, it came out in the 90s. And I've noticed a theme with most of the movies I've been on for this. and I'll get to it in a bit, but I was like, how old is Jim in this? Because like obviously he's been in the Sonics more recently. Like how he's 32 in this movie. Yeah, I had to look it up.
I had seen 31. Either way,
Wow.
deeply upsetting.
Very much so.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
Well, Cameron Diaz is like, I think she was 21 when it came out. I think she was like 19 when they were filming,
Oh my God.
which is also insane because they don't look like they have that big an age discrepancy. I don't know. I don't think that's that important of a thing, and it's not something that I'm like, we should stop the tracks and comment on that. Although I do really
There's
want to
been
stop the
worse
tracks and go
versions
back
of
to make
that
a comment
lately.
about Charlie's Angels, but I won't do it.
Like Roadhouse had a gap of like 20 something years between Jake Gyllenhaal and Daniela McClure, who played his love interest. I think it was 20 years.
And I'm Daniela McClure. You may remember me from some Jake Gyllenhaal.
I don't know how to pronounce it, unfortunately. She's got a lovely Portuguese last name that I don't know how to say. One of the things I liked about this movie that I don't think I would have had an appreciation for before is it is in such an unreality. Like, I'm glad it's not a real place. It looks like if you blend, again, I've been to these cities as a visitor, and I'll take your two opinions more accurately for this, but it feels like you just sort of smushed New York, Chicago, Detroit all together. In this, it's like generic, like it could have been called Metro City or whatever.
New Chicago.
Right? New Chicago, yeah. And
I felt like it was very LA with the smog and the gross.
I think
Sure,
they
that
do
makes
a
sense.
perfect job putting it in a fake place because the whole world is meant to feel a bit extreme. And it's, considering Kyle was on for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, that does a perfect job of putting the turtles in a somewhat realistic New York. Even though there's like Foot Clan ninjas going about, the New York still feels somewhat realistic. And Edge City, they were like, listen, if we put this in a fake city, you don't have to think about this as a real place. And I think that works for it too.
Yeah.
Can we discuss briefly what were Jack Russell Terriers doing in the 90s that like this and Frasier, they just took off, man.
And
Wishbone.
Wishbone.
Yeah.
My
I don't
dog
know.
Skip, is that a Jack Russell Terrier also?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I might be
Yes.
wrong, but I think it is. I haven't watched that movie since it
is.
came out because I don't want to cry.
Oh my God, Dylan, do you remember when we saw that in the movie theaters together?
I think
Dog and Pup
I don't
took
think
me,
I've
you,
watched
and
it
Zach.
since.
Me neither. Oh no, that's not true. I had it on VHS. My dog Skip. Wow, that movie will send you straight to the psych ward.
Yeah.
Yes, it is also a Jack Russell Terrier. I looked it up.
It is.
Thank you.
Jack Russell Terriers are the ones that jump really high. Yeah. I mean, people, they were huge in the 90s. You don't see them much anymore. Also, the dog in The Mask, Milo, not fixed. Walking around with
we
balls.
do see his tiny testicles. You know what? Milo kicks
And
ass.
dead for sure.
Oh, yeah.
That doesn't need to be brought up, but yeah.
Yeah.
Also,
Harsh reality.
because you mentioned Zach, there's a thing in this movie that I didn't remember was something that I've quoted for the last 20 years, where it's the scene where the gang wants to beat up Stanley and he transforms into the mask and he's making them, little balloon animals. And then he pulls out a condom and he's like, wait, wrong pocket. And he pulls out a balloon and he transforms it into a machine gun and he goes, a Tommy gun. And I don't know why, but I was like, oh my God, I felt like the Manchurian Candidate where I was like, I've said that 1 billion times and I had no idea why. And now I know.
I felt that way about something in this movie too. There was a line that, oh man, and maybe Corey can help me, but it was like, somebody said something, and I was like, oh, I say that all the time. And I had never seen this movie before this. It was, oh God, I don't know. I could probably pull up IMDb and look at like the quotes and tell you what it is, but there's a line that I say all the time, and I couldn't believe it was from this movie.
You work on that. Well, Kyle, let me ask you something. Were you as distracted as I was by two of the hairstyles in this movie?
I mean, it feels the saddest part of the reality of this is, I guess, like it's the 30th anniversary would have just happened this past summer, but it's one of those things where I'm like, they're not dated, right? And then I'm watching it like, oh no, like this is abundantly clear. This was 1994.
There's two specifically that stand out.
Okay,
There's the mob boss. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, yes, there's the sleeked back ponytail. And then for our Avatar fans, one of the henchmen just has the Zuko haircut, which is he's bald, but a tight ponytail near the base of his skull.
Yeah, he's got like a rat tail thing just going, like he's fully bald the rest of his head. Why was this the choice, sir? Like,
That
for
was
what?
crazy.
I had thought it was in this movie because, like, henchmen, you have to make them colorful or iconic with some sort of apparel choice or haircut. And every time we kept seeing him, I was like, oh, one of my favorite scenes of all time from this film is the scene at the Coco Cabana after the mask appears and he does all the I could quote the entire sequence, but when he's doing the Sally Field, like, they love me, they really love me, and he's doing all the fake deaths, and we kept seeing that one henchman, the bald one, well, not entirely bald, but 99% bald. And I was just staring at him like, he's got a weird haircut, but I don't remember what it is. Like, is it a rat tail? What? And then when we were in Stanley's apartment and I'm calling it the Zuko haircut. I was like, what? Who thought this was a good idea? Like, I don't understand. Crazy. But I'm glad you brought up the condom thing, because an element that I've realized, and unintentional, I believe, but all of the films, except for, I would say, The Mask of Zorro, are films that I'm watching this going, I wouldn't show my kids this now, but I definitely saw this young. But they're these weird, like, family friendly-ish movies with an edge. Because, like, this certainly has it. Because I don't know if you two remember this, but I'd certainly seen this on VHS. But the version of the movie I had watched the most was Kellogg's had done like a DVD in the cereal box thing in like really late 90s, early 2000s. And we had a copy of The Mask. And there were two scenes that I remembered not seeing and being like, well, that's weird that they're not there. One was just the condom balloon joke was cut. All the other balloon animals were there. And the mufflers being shoved into the mechanics.
Yeah,
that was also not present. So there were a couple elements where that was the version of the movie I watched, because it was we never owned this growing up, but I had this cereal box DVD and I watched that. I mean, DVDs in its own right is just a dated statement. But one of the things that I also really noticed that I don't think I had an appreciation before while watching this was I really appreciated the almost muted cinematography and lighting. Like, there's a distinct line across so many of the characters. Like, it's either a harsh blue light or it's a harsh red light or even almost a sepia tone to kind of establish what's going on. Like, night scenes, lots of blue shadows, and then in the daytime, some like really soft, almost sepia tone shadows. And it clearly was choices. And it felt like this was a not real, but this was a succinct universe, because it's not in a real place. And it kind of reminded me of like things we saw later on, like Sin City going all black and white.
Well, I think I do just appreciate that just because you're a comedy does not mean you have to have flat lighting, and I think that's the thing that comes from, like, TV sitcominess moving into film. But I think what happens when you see directors who are not just comedy guys, because the guy who directed this, I'll talk about him more later. He has a background that is not fully comedy. So I did appreciate, you have a scene at night, but there's still, it's meant to look almost sunset light wise, where there is a blue and there's a nice orange that's on them at the same time. And yes, it's believably nighttime, I put in air quotes, but you can still buy the fact that, like, oh, I can see them. It doesn't have to be like Game of Thrones where it's like, it's nighttime and therefore you can't make out a damn thing. No, nobody likes that.
Yeah. So, by the way, for those keeping score, it was Somebody Stop Me. That was the one.
Oh yeah, that and that smokin' and that's a spicy meatball have all
you're right.
Punctured
that's
the zeitgeist.
The one. Oh, I'm sorry. It was spicy meatball. That was
spicy
the one. But I was like,
meatball.
oh, yeah, I had no idea that was from this. Both of those, I suppose, but that was the one that really was like, oh, fuck. Everyone I know says that and has said that before. Okay, so my turn. You guys have been boring for long enough. It's time for me to give the goods.
Okay.
The reason that I never saw this movie growing up is because my mom didn't like it. And my mom loves Jim Carrey. Like, we have watched Liar Liar. We have watched Bruce Almighty. We have watched like so many Jim Carrey movies.
Gabriel
but
Gubla.
Of course. And I mean, the cable guy is like a staple of our childhood. Name a time we were in the minivan and we weren't watching the cable guy. However, the two Jim Carrey movies that I have not seen are The Mask and Ace Ventura: Pet Detective. And I think it's because my mom just was like, I don't want to watch that. Like, let's watch something else. And watching this back as an adult, I was like, oh, I get it. And not like it just it like I under it's such a conundrum for me because Jim Carrey does what Jim Carrey does better than anyone on planet Earth could do it. And there is no other person on the face of the earth, alive or dead, that can do what he did. But he got so much better at doing it without just doing it to a point where it's like it's kind of like a little kid. It's like, okay, all right, enough. Jesus Christ. And I think like so like it just those two characters are just seem like really similar and like they just really do it. And then it feels like he found his ways of being Jim Carrey that are not just hitting you in the face with Jim Carrey the whole time.
I feel like the equivalent is it's like you're talking about when Adam Sandler just did a whole movie where he's talking like this.
Yes. That's exactly what it is. Now, I would also like to say that I think it is fucking appalling. Like, I am riddled with anger and disdain that anybody could tell me they like this movie, but they didn't like The Cat in the Hat because it's the same fucking movie.
Whoa.
They had a whole song and dance where he was dressed like a fucking mariachi. Are you kidding me?
Gab.
Damn it.
That's a bold statement to just put those on the same level. Gab's like, there's a dog and people dance. Same thing. I'm like, well, you're right there.
I'll die on this hill. This is the hill I'm dying on. It's the same movie. Ugh. And like a samurai, I will fall on my sword. But that is what I believe. That is what I believe. It's the same movie, except The Cat in the Hat, arguably funnier.
Whoa. That's a spicy meatball.
Let's go. Come on.
All right. So all right. Oh boy. Gab, I love you. You're the best.
I
know. Boy. Okay. So
I feel like we're both in shock.
A little bit. I'm just going to sit here drinking my cherry Coke Zero. I'm very tired. Okay. So I will give you similarities, but so your experience with this, I think, makes a lot of sense because perspective on art, when you come into it, just as like in general, paintings, books, stories, a lot of that comes to when you're exposed to that. It's why I wanted to make sure like Melody saw Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. For our prequel lovers, I just call it Star Wars, quite like as soon as possible. So that way, like it hadn't been diluted by other crap, right? It's a lot of film Twitter likes to call it like the Die Hard conundrum as well, which was like the everyman became generic for like Speed was Die Hard on a bus. Under Siege was Die Hard on a boat with Steven Seagal doing some Aikido. Right? Like a lot of these frameworks get taken into other things. And while I would agree with you, Cat in the Hat has similar moments, you might have been able to sell me on The Cat in the Hat is just How the Grinch Stole Christmas, another Jim Carrey movie, because I find those much more similar. It's really interesting because the reason I brought up like contextually when you see this is 1994 for our Lord and Saviors is the year of Jim Carrey. It was Ace Ventura, Dumb and Dumber, and The Mask.
Yes.
And personally, I get the like, look at me, I'm everything annoyance more so in Ace Ventura. What I actually appreciate about Stanley Ipkiss and The Mask, which I guess it's just The Mask, is we actually get duality out of Jim Carrey, right? Like it's the repressed, it's why you get the Bueller guy. For that one scene is that he is this, and like, I mean, cards on the table. You guys already did male, so I'm assuming read mine.
Yes.
And what I appreciated from this version of Jim Carrey is that he's not on all the time, and that's what makes The Mask fun. And why I described him as an antagonist is a hero is only ever from the perspective of the story, right? Like every actor who's been a good villain says like, well, the villain is just the antagonist to the hero's story. And like a lot of what The Mask does is completely self-serving in this instance, right? He gets the money, he wants the girl. Like this is only for Stanley. He's still a criminal, right? If you're following along from the police perspective, which we get in this. And of course, everybody has their Doyle in their lives that we yell at. And that's what I like the difference in that is like Stanley is like, he has the confidence to be the Mask in The Mask. And we see him kind of like crack out of his shell because of his relationship with Tina. And so I found it not overwhelming because I've seen some of the other movies. I wouldn't argue that I think the fine-tunement of Jim's abilities may be better in other films. Me also being from Newmarket, Ontario, which is where Jim is from. There's some fun trivia. Obviously wildly different success levels, but in terms of The Mask, I like this like edge, pun intended, that he works on in this film. Like the big zany cartoon moments, and like I know all the lines to Cuban Pete, which was a real song before this, but because of that, like this movie is in an unreality which allows for the cartooniness. The problem with Cat in the Hat is it sucks.
I also feel like the Cat in the Hat, the boldness to claim that these are the same just because there's a dance number and they're both comedic. One is clearly like the Cat in the Hat is meant to be for children and Dr. Seuss. It does not have any rhyming in it. It does not have that much funny in it. And I definitely think this is funnier than the Cat in the Hat. You know what I mean? Yeah. And also, you know, if you compare Mike Myers and Jim Carrey, I feel bad coming down on Mike Myers in this way, but he's no Jim Carrey. Mike Myers is Shrek, and we all think of him as Shrek.
They have different traits, like skills.
So many characters.
I think Mike's biggest skill is, and this is not a criticism, because comedy being such a, I'd say comedy and drama have such, like, they're so connected because of the emotional reaction you're trying to get from your audience member. Gab is the actor, right? Like you're either trying to make somebody cry, you're trying to make somebody laugh. Like more often than not, those are kind of the two main, or scared if you want to throw in horror as a opposing genre, where Jim's like, look at me, I'm in your face. Like that's his thing. And like, that's how he makes people laugh. Where Mike's biggest skill, I would argue, has almost been like is a subdued level of comedy. Like why he works so well in Shrek is because he's playing off so well off of somebody, right? Like he's a duality guy, or a comedy duo guy, right? Like we have Garth in Wayne's World, we have Donkey in Shrek, we have the fish in Cat in the Hat. I'm going to be honest, I saw that movie as a child and I went, no. And then we have Jim, who more often than not, it's a solo act, right? There's not enough space or time to even have a real straight man. Like Charlie is friends in what, 3 scenes in this film?
Yeah, I didn't remember how unimportant he mostly is to the movie.
Right? He's in 2 scenes in the bank, 1 at the club, and then like the ending, right? He probably shot for a week on this film. And I just find that they're trying to achieve separate things. Like as a comparison, Jason Bateman is hilarious as a straight man. Typically, he's the guy the jokes are bouncing off of, right? Or like in I Love You, Man, where you have Jason Segel being like the zanier guy bouncing off of Paul Rudd, who's just slapping that bias, right? So
I think air slapping bases over here.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I think there's so many different. I think that's one of the finest aspects of comedy that I really appreciate. Is there's such a gambit to which you can be funny. Like you can be doing all the accents, or you can be telling wicked jokes, or sometimes you can make people laugh. George Carlin once had an opening act where he said nothing, and everyone was dying. Probably one of the most famous monologues of all time. So the variety to which you can do stuff, and I think, in my opinion, the reason I brought up The Mask was I think this is one of the best times with Jim. Like, obviously, and you two have an appreciation for The Cable Guy, and Bruce Almighty, I think the three of us would all agree is one of Jim's better films. But in terms of his really zaniness, this is one of my favorites. Liar Liar has its moments, but there's a period shortly after this where it felt like too much, right? Dick and Jane. I can't even like, and then Jim went into more dramas and stuff, right? Like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
The Number 23.
And what's the one where he played? It was the Moon Man, right?
Man on the Moon.
Man on the Moon. And then the one where he's inside a box. Truman Show, right? So like his range as a performer clearly is quite extensive. So I don't know. I'm not on for the Cat in the Hat episode, so I'm glad.
Well,
I'm glad we're
here's
past
what I
the
will
Cat in the
say.
Hat episode.
Shut up. Jim Carrey is a gift to this universe. I just think that much in the same way you need to kind of always leave them wanting more, he needs to just tone it the fuck down a little bit. And he does, and we all love it. But this shtick that he hung his hat on for a while got old very quickly. And I think he spent a long time trying to recover from that. I mean, like, you know, he had like Lloyd Christmas, phenomenal character, right? Not really doing a lot of the Jim Carrey. All these other awesome roles that we've mentioned him in, so good. But this brief period where he was like super zany, I don't care for it. And I think I can say I don't care for this version of Jim Carrey and still love, adore, admire, appreciate Jim Carrey. Now that said, I don't know. That's it. Sorry.
That's just a great way to end a sentence. Now that said.
Yeah. Now that's said.
Done.
We had brought up the joke
I'm
earlier, the used condom joke, which you were like, oh, that might be too much that I wouldn't show this to my kids. I want to talk about a line that's said later in this movie that I was like, this is filthy. He is flirting with Tina in Landfill Park and he goes, kiss me, my dear, and I will reveal my croissant. I will spread your pate. I will dip my ladle in your Vichy soie. And I was like, whoa.
Yeah. Also,
yeah, I'm sorry.
That was psychotic. I was like, oh my God. Then, I mean, all of a lot of gun violence. I was like, this is gratuitous with the shooting and the like, and listen, I'm not sensitive to that, but it does feel like for a children's movie, I was like, oh my God, this is very sexual. It was a little rapey, and it was a little violent. And I was like, damn, the 90s were a time, huh?
I don't think it was ever a children's movie though, right? It was just a comedy that I was like, yeah, your kid can watch it. Yeah, that's fine. Like, I don't think it was marketed as like The Cat in the Hat is a kid's movie. You know what I mean?
Well, this
is
felt
not
like
meant
a
to be
kid's
a
movie.
kid's
I was
movie.
annoyed by it. I was like, shut up already.
Well, we know where Gab's. I did like also, I feel like it's not a kid's movie. What it is they make sure that we see Stanley has all this cartoon stuff all over his house. He's clearly into
Tasmanian Devil, yeah.
Tex Avery.
No, it's a wolf. It's a wolf.
What's a wolf?
It's not the Tasmanian Devil. It's a wolf. He does the spins.
He does the Tasmanian Devil spins, and he has a pillow in his apartment.
He has a pillow of it.
Yeah. I thought we were talking about the cartoons he watches.
No. He has the pillow.
Yeah, but I was going to bring up, we see him watching all these cartoons and love all these cartoons, which makes it make sense for why when he becomes the Mask, not only is he have this repressed romanticism, but I enjoy every time he does the wind up move where his arms go up in the direction opposite of the way he's about to spin or go in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I really like Stanley as a character, but honestly, I was also a little surprised by, I feel like I remember as a little kid, this being like so funny to me. And watching it as an adult, I was like, oh, it's not really like laugh out loud from start to finish, joke, 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 joke. You know what I mean? Like, they're obviously every time the Mask is there, it's meant to be lots of comedy, but there's a lot more, drama within the comedy than I remember there being.
I like the balance of that. Like there are elements of this that kind of reminded me of the genie from Aladdin, right? Like the pop culture references, quite literally breaking the fourth wall when he's handed an award, right? We're referencing the Sally Field thing. I guess for our Gen Z listeners, Aunt May from the Amazing Spider-Man movies, she won an Oscar like in the 70s. Um, and what I liked so much from The Mask particularly, and it's an interesting era from visual effects standpoint because so many things age so poorly. Look at the special editions of Star Wars. They look so bad. And what I appreciate about the minimal use of this, because it's this zany world, even the fully 3D rendered green wolf he shows up for one point in the Coco Cabana, like doing the howling, like the textures probably aren't great, but in terms of it fitting into that world, it doesn't look like, oh my God, there's early 90s visual effects and then everything else is real. Like even when Milo gets the mask on, like, yeah, it's insane to look at, but they still managed to put that head on a real dog. Not like with
it looked
the
good,
effects. Yeah. Like
I think it helps that it's meant to be cartoony, that you're not, if it was meant to look 1000% photorealistic, you'd probably be like, well, no, it doesn't look like that. Like the only time I really didn't jive with the special effects that I can think of is when he has the moment where he screams and his skull comes out as he's screaming and then it goes back in. And I was like, oh, well, that looks kind of crappy. But for the most part, it all looks totally fine because it's cartoon. You know what I mean? It's not meant to be like the dinosaurs from Jurassic Park where you're like, oh my God, that's a dinosaur. You're like, well, yeah, it looks cartoony enough. And it looks like it's interacting with the world enough that you're more than accepting of it.
Yeah. I agree.
We were talking about lines that quoted, and obviously the meatball one was the big one. But the one that I had forgotten, I used to say a lot, which is kind of morbid, but there's like, gee, Ma, look, I'm roadkill when he's all flat after falling out the window. That one I always really appreciated.
I didn't remember that one at all. I didn't remember that happening. And I was surprised.
I thought he inflated himself with his thumb, like, and then blew himself up, but I clearly was misremembering that.
That's from something though. I can't remember what.
It's from something else.
Yeah.
I think it's the genie. Like these two characters I quite enjoy. So
I also appreciate a reference to another movie that we called A Movie to Watch Before You Die. The mask going, no, it wasn't me. It was the one-armed man.
Yeah. I actually, it's funny because now that you say it, I'm like, oh, that's The Fugitive, right? Is that what it's from? But I remember he said it and I looked at Corey and I was like, that's from something. That's from something we watched. But then like the movie kept, and then I was like, oh, I'm back in the movie. But that is really funny. Okay. Love you both dearly. Does anybody else have anything pressing to say before we move on?
I just want to give a quick shout out to Milo the dog for what is an impressive piece of dog acting when he is in the police precinct in the jail cell and he goes and he picks up the cheese and he said, no, not the cheese, the keys. And when he goes to take the keys off the guard and the guard rustles. And I don't know, I'm sure there's an easy way they did it off camera, but the fact that the dog stops and just looks up at him to wait for him to stop rustling and then pulls off the key. I was like, that is some top-notch Jack Russell Terrier dog acting. Kudos.
This is Mount Rushmore dog acting. There's like whatever dog was in Air Bud and then Milo.
Yeah.
And then
I'll agree with that. We'll have to figure out the rest in future episodes, but I agree with those two for now.
I like
Beethoven,
that. Yeah,
maybe? Right? Maybe. Beethoven?
Which, boy, oh boy, if you haven't watched Beethoven in a long time,
no.
Beethoven, I forgot what it's about, and I'll say it very briefly. The villain wants to test explosive rounds ammunition on a large dog breed's skull. That's why they're trying to steal Beethoven in that movie. I was like, what in the world? This is the most...
Whoa.
That's cartoonishly evil. Yeah.
That's crazy. I've never seen that movie.
Should we get to the facts now?
Let's do it.
I want the truth.
Face the facts, ducks.
Facts have no place with an organized religion.
IMDb, The Mask has a 6.9 out of 10. On the Rotten Tomatoes tomato meter, it gets 80% with an average rating of 6.5 out of 10. 45 fresh reviews, 11 rotten. The audience score is 68% with an average score of 3.7 out of 5. It had a budget of $23 million. It grossed $352 million. Let's see. The critics' consensus. It misses perhaps as often as it hits, but Jim Carrey's manic bombast, Cameron Diaz's blousy appeal. Blousy? Blousy? What is that word supposed to be?
I read that as well. I think it has to be blousy. Like,
yeah, blase is BLASE. Yeah. Yeah, well, whatever. And the film's overall cartoony bombast keep the mask afloat. Not often you see a sentence with the word bombast in it twice. Uh, Roger Ebert gave it 3 stars and said, "The Mask is a perfect vehicle for the talents of Jim Carrey, who underwhelmed me with Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, but here seems to have found a story and character that work together with his manic energy." Janet Maslin from the New York Times, "Bright-eyed, crazily intense, irrepressibly silly, Mr. Carrey can be funny without fireworks. He deserves material clever enough to let him do just that." Derek Adams from Time Out, "The design is bright as a button and the transformation scenes real eye poppers, but the film's best special effect is putty-faced Carrey with his razzle-dazzle star turn as the affable Stanley and his manic alter ego." Last review, Owen Gleiberman from Entertainment Weekly, "Carrey now has the clout to find a vehicle worthy of his hyperactive gooniness. When he does, we'll see if he's truly a jester for our time or simply the moron of the moment." We got a couple letterbox. "How? In many ways, this is American Psycho," which I found funny to think about, but I'm like, I guess I would love to see Christian Bale as the Mask. I would totally watch that. Amy said, "This is Joker if Arthur Fleck just kept a positive attitude." Luke, "I watched this entire movie at a doctor's office today because when I got there for some reason, the guy at the desk put it on for me. He said, 'Let's put on something good for you,' and chose The Mask. Doctor was an hour and a half late."
Was this in the
That's
States?
psychotic.
I would guess so. The last one from Matt Singer, "Some of the Mask shtick plays way ickier than I remembered, and overall there's not nearly as many jokes as I would have thought based on how much I enjoyed this when I was 13. I'll tell you who does rule, though, the dog. I want to see a whole movie about Milo."
There we go. That is just like, cut that. That's my bird.
The movie was directed by Chuck Russell, who also directed The Scorpion King, A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, and The Blob. Screenplay was by Mike Werb, who also wrote Lara Croft Tomb Raider, Face Off, and the 2006 Curious George movie. It stars Jim Carrey as Stanley Ipkiss, who you may know from all the other movies we said during this episode. Cameron Diaz as Tina, who you might know from Shrek, Charlie's Angels, and There's Something About Mary. Peter Riegert as Detective Calloway, who you may know from Animal House, The Sopranos, or as one of those dastardly defense attorneys from Law & Order SVU. He pops up every now and then. Peter Green as Dorian, who you might know as Zed from Pulp Fiction, and Amy Asbeck as Peggy, who you might know from Problem Child, Robin Hood Men in Tights, and Richard Jeni as Charlie. Let's see here. Okay, are we ready for the zany fun facts?
I have one that I find really interesting.
Well, let me see if I can throw this spicy meatball at you. Let me see if I have it first, and then
I don't think you do.
No, you go for it.
So I was just curious because it's the context of successful box office numbers is always changing. I had a listener ask me about Superman, which comes out next year. Like, what's going to be considered successful for that movie? So I was curious, based on inflation, you had listed that it was $351.6 million for The Mask in 1994.
Yeah.
So in 2024 dollars, that's $738 million.
Yeah. It was a huge hit.
Smash success.
It was smokin'.
No boy.
EARTY because I gotta.
Yeah, I didn't remember that line, but I'm surprised that one doesn't stick out more to people. Chuck Russell revealed that a lot of money was saved on special effects after Jim Carrey was cast because of his body movements being so flexible and cartoonish, they didn't feel a need to enhance them. This was Cameron Diaz's first acting role, and prior to landing the role of Tina Carlisle, the producers originally suggested Anna Nicole Smith. Yeah, I know. I internally made the same face Gab made when I saw that. When the police are searching the Mask's pants, they had the pants cut off at the knees with prop guys handing items through the bottom, which makes sense because there's bazookas coming out of there and all kinds of other shit.
He's like Mary Poppins' purse. The best is the picture of his wife.
Yes.
I love that. You married her.
Jim Carrey was paid $450,000 for his work in the film, a huge bargain for a new line because the deal was signed before Ace Ventura became a surprise hit and made The Mask a hot property for the summer 1994 release schedule. Carrey then inked a $7 million deal before this film opened to star in Dumb and Dumber.
Oh.
And do you remember what he was in 1995?
When Nature Calls, Ace Ventura?
I'll give you a hint. There was a really popular Seal song in it.
Oh, Batman Forever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That song is the best thing to come out of that movie.
I'll tell you what, my one of the proudest things about me is that I have gone out of my way in my 32 years of being alive to not learn the words to that song. I don't know any of the words. And
But it's
I've listened to it
Seal.
plenty.
It's
Okay,
so
that's great.
good.
Someday
Okay.
we're gonna go karaoke, do that song, Gab.
Baby, I don't know it. And
That just
honestly,
sounds
I'm
like you're
happy.
drunk, but okay.
It's like what, when people are like, tell us something about you, like give us a fun fact. People are like, I've been to 600 countries. I've done da da da. And I'm like, I don't know any of the words to that Seal song everybody loves.
That's your icebreaker when you're in a new group of
Yeah.
people? Okay.
Yep.
A professional golfer was used to hit the teed golf ball off of Dorian's mouth, but the scream was Peter Green's genuine reaction to being to having that happen. This movie was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, along with Forrest Gump and True Lies, and lost to Forrest Gump, which I think is valid. People who were considered before Jim Carrey for Stanley Ipkiss, which I guess before they decided to write the movie more towards Jim Carrey, Matthew Broderick, which no, would not have worked.
No.
Martin Short, which I could see Martin Short attempting.
No, he's not funny.
I know. I feel like you said this last time. I could see him going for it. I don't think it would work as well.
No, he'd be Frank. You want Frank in a green mask? No, thank you.
I'd watch it. Steve Martin and Rick Moranis. And the last one I have here, Cameron Diaz had to audition, she estimates, 12 times to get on the role. They found her because she worked for a modeling agency in the same building as the casting agency. And she wasn't cast until a week before filming began. And that is the end of my fun facts. Should we get to these verdicts?
Okay. Please.
Mail time! When you control the mail, you control information.
Mom asked me to ask you if there's any mail for us here by mistake.
What?
Do or do not. There is no try.
The guilty will be punished.
Sentence is death.
Gab, why don't you start? You seem to be fairly obvious, and then we'll go to Kyle.
Yeah. Listen, I didn't hate it. It was fine. It's not my cup of tea. I don't think it's cute. I think Jim Carrey nailed it with a little bit more experience. It wasn't meant for me, and I could live without never seeing it again. But I'm glad I've seen it. It's not a movie to watch before you die for me, no.
Kyle, I'm guessing you're still a yes, but why don't you give me a little bit more than that?
Yeah, you know what's funny? When we were going back and forth on what to suggest, I mean, I might be wearing a piece of apparel towards one of the other things I suggested. And I thought about like you've done some more recent movies. And I tried to sort of stick to the 90s. I don't know, maybe Special Jacket number 5. I'll pick something from this century, but my certainty when the suggesting was like, yeah, of course this, but I have an appreciation for this now because of where Jim's career went. Like, I understand Gab's love of The Cable Guy. I personally love How the Grinch Stole Christmas. It's probably the most quoted movie amongst my sister and I. I have a little sign from the hate, 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 double hate, loathe entirely. Like that movie gets quoted all year round in the Naranya household. And what I appreciated from this, I mentioned in general thoughts, which is that I like the edge to the film. It being something that you're like, you would put on, maybe not thinking about it, and be like, oh, like you almost regret some of the choices, but I kind of like that like, have I shown my kids this yet? No, I don't know when I will, but as a time capsule, and my mind for this list has always kind of been like, if you had to show something based on blank, and whether that was a director, an actor's career, or whatnot, like similarly to that, why Raiders as an example. But in terms of Jim Carrey's career, he has such an interesting and eclectic one where you could bottle the dramatic actor, you could bottle the zany comedy, and then some of his other stuff. I mean, to compare this to Cat in the Hat, I'm still bewildered by that, but to each their
Get
own.
over it.
Okay. And in terms of this era, like the 90s era of Jim Carrey, I really do think this shows all of the tools that Jim does have, and he uses them all. I can understand Gab's perspective. If he was doing Ace Ventura as Stanley, to me, this movie would be too much. And I like Ace Ventura. I like Dumb and Dumber, but I mean, it's a duo comedy role, right? You've got both Jeff Daniels and Jim in that film. But to have Stanley actually feel like a succinct character and then to have the mask, I like that there's two sides of the same coin. I like the groundedness of this feeling like a small movie. It's a lower budget. I mean, at the time it probably was mid, but it's such a special version of movies they don't make anymore. Like I'm watching Agatha All Along on Disney Plus, and it looks like it was shot in one of our houses, and the production values are garbage. I'm not really looking forward to reviewing it later.
I'm sure it still costs $30 million an episode, but yes.
No, it's apparently the cheapest thing they've made, and boy, you can tell. And because of that, I like this part of Jim's career specifically because I think you can see where his performance as Stanley led to Man on the Moon or The Truman Show, like the more dramatic stuff. And I mean, he's somebody who hasn't really played in genre. And as like a diehard comic book fan, like you guys can see what's always behind me. And if you're a follower of my pod's social stuff, you'll see it. But outside of this, it's Sonic. And I'm kind of glad that he held off for so long in doing something else because I think he's a great Eggman. So if you had to ask me if I had to pick one of Jim's films to put on the movies to watch before you die, I know this is probably, Gab doesn't agree, as she said, but I would pick The Mask out of his comedies.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard anybody say. And I disagree. And
yeah,
now I don't respect
interesting,
you.
Bold proclamation. And Gab doesn't respect you anymore. For me, I would say I loved this movie as a kid, and I can remember a Tommy gun, and that's a spicy meatball. And you know what? I didn't remember that much of it, but I'm kind of not that surprised I didn't, because honestly, it's not as funny as I remembered it being as a kid. I do think dramatically it's also a little bit better than I remembered it being. You know, I think Jim Carrey's doing a little bit more there, and I buy the romance between him and Tina, and I buy his loneliness, but yeah, it's not top tier Carrey to me. It's probably in the secondary tier. If there's S tier, A tier Jim Carrey, it's probably bottom of A, top of B tier Carrey. You know what I mean? I'm not going to call it a movie to watch before you die, but I had a good time watching it. Like I wasn't like, oh, this sucks. But yeah, when we talk about Jim Carrey stuff that's at the top of our list, the Truman Show's up there for me. The Cable Guy's up there for me. Yeah, even as far as the three movies that came out that year, Ace Ventura, this, and Dumb and Dumber, I probably don't like this as much as Ace Ventura.
Okay.
Yeah. But obviously you like Dumb and Dumber the best.
I haven't watched Dumb and Dumber recently enough. I do like Dumb and Dumber. I also am one of the few people, though, who will say I like Dumb and Dumberer When Harry Met Lloyd.
I like Dumb and Dumberer too.
Yeah, Dumb and Dumberer, that scene where Bob Saget makes that movie work for me alone. But
it's so good. Yeah.
I feel like Kyle is, to use a word that Gavin and I said before we started recording, flabbergasted right now. Kyle is like, what is wrong with these two? I'm sorry we've disappointed you, Kyle.
No, you know what?
Kyle.
I got about halfway through. Again, I just have to bat 30%. I'm 50% right now. So no sadness from me. I just got to make sure the next one's a winner to sort of bump up my career statistics. But I know I completely respect that. As I said, I think point of view when you're coming into it, like comedy, again, it's so subjective. Like, I mean, Gab shared her hottest of takes. I'll share one of my comedy ones, which is I think Bridesmaids is awful. I don't think it's funny. So it's a very hard art form, and I've heard some of your critique, I think fair criticism of a recent action comedy with Deadpool and Wolverine, where the amount of misses or the quantity of jokes that didn't work for you or did. And I think that's one of the things that makes comedy in general so interesting. And I kind of appreciate that this had a balance of both.
I respect the quantity of jokes that this movie goes for, where it does not overload you and it lets there be room for drama. But the quality of joke was not high enough that I was, guffawing at
They
any
were
time.
all cheap. Yeah.
No, there was some good stuff here. Let's not
The large majority.
there was a good amount of ones that were like obvious, I guess. But
yeah,
I liked it. I'm not going to rush back to watch it, but I liked it.
Okay. Well, glad you had a good time, Dill. I really am.
Kyle, do you want to plug the Film Realist? Because Gab is about to tear her face off. I can tell she's looking up at that Met game. Right now, we are recording during Mets wild card game 2, and Gab is on the edge of her seat. She's in Edge City right now.
It's currently 1-1 at the top of the second. Somebody did something. We can tell by Gab's expression.
Oh my God.
What happened?
Sorry. That was it. So Starling Marte hit like a soft dribbler to the first baseman, and then the first baseman lost control of it, so he got there safely. And then it was like, is he going to go for 2? But he didn't.
You're giving that big a reaction for a single, Gab? For a single?
I mean, it's big day.
Oh my God. All right. Kyle, plug the Film Realist for us.
Is it this Friday? Are we talking this Friday?
No, this would be coming out October 18th.
Oh God, that's tough for me then. Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. This is actually one of the parts of the schedule I was looking at recently. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Okay. If you are listening to this day of release, hi, my name is Scott Interrante. I host the Film Reelists podcast, over 100 episodes of the show. And this week I will have released my review of Saturday Night, the film about the very first SNL episode going to air. And then the upcoming weekend will probably be a wrap up of a couple other things. There's a bunch of shows coming to an end, maybe some initial impressions of something else yet to be determined, but I'm on all the socials, same as you guys. The link trees are connected to all the things. So,
and we'll have Kyle's link tree in the description below, along with links for our merch, the Hall of Pods podcasting network, which we're a part of, our link tree. Gab, what else do we say about things? If you want to send us a voicemail, you can send it to if you want to send us an email. I switched up. Gab was right. Send us a voicemail at anchor.fm/movies to watch, or you can send us an email at movieswatchbeforeyouDie@gmail.com. We're 90-something episodes into this. We still can't do this. You can get yourself a shirt. And honestly,
I bought a shirt. One. I bought one.
What?
I bought a shirt. I did.
Aw. You will be the first non-Dylan to have that. You'll have a shirt before Gab does.
Speaking of, where are the shirts I sent you, fools? What's going on here?
We haven't seen each other to do it yet.
Kyle, you should have just asked me where I live. We live so far apart from each other. We don't see each other that often.
I was saving myself the cost of the shipping, so I shipped it to one place.
I will ship it to Gab so that we can just each send you a picture.
You'll ship it an hour away.
Yes. I'm 100% going to mail it to her. I'm not making the trek to go see Gab for that.
God, no.
I want to know about Gab's trip.
My trip was great. Listen, this is playoff baseball. Can we have we talked about the movie enough?
She said 3 strikes, you're out, Kyle. We're gonna go out of here and hope that 2 weeks ago the Mets won this game.
Mets go ahead 2-1. And guess what? Starling Marte, because he got on first base, scored. So yeah, you have to react like that. All right, listen, thank you all so much for listening. Let's go Mets. Dylan, next episode, it's just going to be me and you, pal. What are we doing?
We're doing Rocky. We were planning on doing Rocky. We're finally getting to it. I'm sure Gab will disappoint me immeasurably.
Who knows? Listen, all I know is fuck Philadelphia, fuck the Phillies, let's go Mets, and Bryce Harper is a piece of shit. I'm out.
Kyle, thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening.
My pleasure.
Ipkiss, get your dog away from me.
I'm sorry he seems to be attracted to you.